Do you think it is possible to accelerate change and scale regenerative ways of living, leading, doing business to bring us where we want to be by 2050?
I believe our stories don't start with our generation. I think we are a product of the generations and the ancestors before us. It's very easy in the impact professions to either get very lost and very emotional about our connection with people and feel like we enter into a state of despair. I fundamentally believe that we have most of the solutions we need right now for the planet, and that we have enough ingenuity in humankind to be able to invent as many new solutions as we need. When we come together as human beings and we truly feel something is close to our heart and very important, we can shift systems very fast and we can make things better systemically. I want us to dream so big that it scares us. And then I want all of us to rise, find each other, and to make those dreams come true.
Hi, Karimah, and welcome to the Shades of Life podcast.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.
So together we will be talking regenerative leadership, which is a beautiful topic. But let's start by getting acquainted with you, because you have a very interesting background, as you are from a small town in India. And in your own words, you became a global nomad. Over generations, your family journeyed from the villages and small towns of India to North America. And you said at every juncture, they navigated a series of choices, circumstances, and chances. And each move forged a new path of opportunity. So that sounds very intriguing. So could you tell us about these journeys of your family and then your own journey?
Sure. I believe our stories don't start with our generation. I think we are products of the generations and the ancestors before us. And I come from a merchant and trading community from the western part of India in the state of Gujarat. And for generations, all four anchors of my family, all four grandparents, their families were within a 150-mile radius of the city of Rajkot in India. And at some point, my two paternal great-grandfathers ventured out in the spirit of trade and the spirit of adventure, one to Burma, the other to the small town where he settled and where I grew up. My maternal grandparents moved from their village in Gujarat to the city of Pune, all for opportunities for themselves, for their future generations. And so there is a spirit of adventure and seeking improvements inside me. My roots really are where that one great-grandfather settled in a small town called Palghar outside of Mumbai, between Mumbai and Gujarat. And he established the family businesses, multiple businesses, including non-timber forest products. And because it was a small town, he was one of the most prominent people in town. After a while, he built our house, which still stands today, and in which our family prospered. And when I was little, being born into this family meant being born into a tradition of community service, right? So if you're prominent, if you're living in a small town in India in the 1970s and 80s, there's a lot of inequality. There's a lot of poverty. We were looking at coastal villages. There were slums in town. There was political activism to be done. There was some really basic healthcare necessities to be taken care of. And my family was involved in all of this. And having been raised in this milieu, I really got a strong sense, a strong core around it's our duty to do this, not because we're better than or we're more than, but because we are the same as the other people we were serving. Because you think about all the chances, choices, and circumstances that had to happen for my family to prosper, and the kinds of chances and circumstances that had to be lacking for people to not have that. And so that's where, my purpose was born, right? My purpose is to defeat inequality so that we have a world where everybody can live. It also put this very strong sense of working with everybody in the spirit of shared humanity, which is now this sense of working in our spirit of shared global humanity. There's also this anchor of the forest, right? Having grown up and having had intergenerational livelihoods from the forest. So that was the anchor. When I was 10, my parents were forced to move to the US because while this community service was beautiful, while intergenerationally we prospered, by the 1980s, India's environment, business environment, and social environment was not such that you could have a fair playing field for everybody. You had to use connections, you had to potentially give bribes in order to operate business, and my parents wouldn't do that. And so they struggled. And we fortunately had a relative who sponsored us, and we started all over from scratch. And that led to an era of settling across the US. I went to middle school in New York, and then I went to 3 different high schools. My third and last high school was in Seattle, Washington. I went to the University of Washington, studied pre-med, because that's what you did. You went from a sense of adventure to a sense of requiring safety. You were the immigrant, the other with no roots, and ended up in pre-med because that was a safe thing to do. But even then, I had the strong sense that my life would be about purpose and impact. So I thought if I became a doctor, I would serve Doctors Without Borders.
Yeah.
And so I didn't like the practice of medicine. I didn't want to become a doctor, but I realized that potentially I should go and study something that helped me still work for Doctors Without Borders. So I went to Oxford and studied refugee studies. And that was really the start of finding what I really wanted to do and how I wanted to activate my purpose. I realized I didn't want to go to refugee camps and work at what was the consequence of the route. And the consequence of the route was that people were forced to migrate because there was want, lack, inequality, war. And so for me, coming from a business family, the most natural thing was figure out how to work on livelihoods, economic development. So I went after grad school and worked in the slums of Mumbai, building a handicraft cooperative, and then worked in the headquarters of the fair trade movement, working with capacity building, training of fair trade cooperatives and workers from across the world, focusing mostly on Asia, and also working on fair trade tea, working with very large companies on converting their trading to fair trade, and realizing the power of leveraging big companies to do big good fast. So I spent my next decade in big companies leveraging their power to do big good fast and fighting really big issues like deforestation and modern slavery, working in companies like Mondelez and Nike. And then after a decade of doing that, I realized that we still weren't going fast enough. And I realized that we could actually activate many more leaders, and we needed to activate many more leaders. And my job is now to activate more leaders than I ever could inside one company, inside one industry, so that we can all achieve my vision, which is within our generation to see a world where all nature and people thrive.
Yeah, which is really beautiful. Yeah, and we'll talk more about that. Wow, that's fascinating to hear about, your trajectory and the trajectory of your family and how it links together. So I think you probably covered that already a little, but so you said that you were conscious of opportunities that you had that others didn't. And you realized early on that your core purpose is to accelerate a world where everyone has the opportunity to rise, which is such a beautiful mission in life. Is there anything else you would like to add about how this trajectory, this background of migration in your family, how it shaped you and your mission today?
I always go back to the names and faces and the conversations that I've had with people, right? How we connect to each other as people. it's very easy in the impact professions to either get very lost and very emotional about our connection with people and feel like we enter into a state of despair, or because it's too much, we disconnect from it and just go to the systems or the paperwork. But I always find power in stories and remembering the stories, whether it was seeing the difference between me and my nanny growing up, right? She was maybe a decade older than me, but look at the opportunities I had. And she was at age 18, married off to a farmer in a distant village, and it was not a happy marriage. What were the opportunities for her versus for all of us here? I've worked with slum children at 2 points in my career, once when I was building my handicraft cooperative and once between fair trade and corporate. And you see people working in really extreme circumstances. And you see the light in them, you see the power in them, and you can see that if you just put them in the same circumstances as you or me, the power they would have to make the world better would be enormous. And so that's what I always remember. And that's what I hope people remember every time they go travel, they go see somebody, that there is this possibility for people in extreme circumstances to do good. And if all of us had the same possibility and capability, look at how much faster the world would get better.
Absolutely, yeah. And I love what you said about, almost like putting a name on the people, knowing their stories, then it takes a totally different dimension. You're absolutely right. So I think we're getting a sense of that, but I wanted to ask you, where are you now in the world, and how important is diversity for you? Traveling, collaborating with people around the world, I think it's quite a big thing for you.
I think it's a key factor in my ability to have my comfort zone start with where many people's comfort zones stop, right? I feel like it's oxygen. And I can, now it feels like now I've been in 43 countries. I can step anywhere and feel like I'm at home. I can figure it out. But I think people look at people like me and think, oh, she can do that. I can't. And the reality is that it's a muscle, right? I didn't bring myself across to the US. I didn't bring myself across from New York to Seattle. That was my parents. When I first went to graduate school, I remember the first call I made home, I cried after I hung up because it was so scary. But I kept traveling and I kept going and I kept meeting people. The first time I went and walked into a slum, even though I was from India, I was uncomfortable, even though I'd grown up visiting people in very precarious circumstances. But the comfort comes from doing it over and over again until you learn that you grow a little each time. You'll learn a little each time, and you remember a little each time why you're here. And that's what feeds my light. And I hope that's what feeds other people's light when they seek out adventures in the world.
Yeah, you are a true people connector, but people in the very broad sense.
Yes.
I always say, even if I'm from France, but I've always seen myself more as a citizen of the world. And I've always seen myself like this ever since I was a child. And I like this perspective. It's like no frontier, I like that.
And what I really love is, Ingrid, when I come to France, I don't go do, of course, I go do the touristy things. I love champagne. I love the Eiffel Tower. But I also love that I have my sisters in Paris who will look up La Fourchette and will come and find a local place where we go have dinner together. And those are the connections that I feel like we need to build more, because I think when we do connect, we will find our way forward.
Yeah, and there is nothing like locals to show you around as well. Much better than being a tourist on your own, for sure. Karimah, I know you have collaborated with people whose life journeys are very diverse. the coffee and oil palm farms of Sumatra to the C-suites of the largest corporations in the world, to the slums of Nairobi, to the global headquarters of international NGOs. So can you tell us about some of these experiences and how did it shape who you are today? How useful has it been for what you aim to do today too?
So I'm going to give you two examples, 10 years apart in the same place, right? I mentioned the coffee and the oil palms of Sumatra. That was experiences that were 10 years apart in very different contexts, but they each taught me something. So coffee was in 2005. If you remember, in end of 2004, there was that massive Indian Ocean tsunami, caused unfortunately a lot of destruction, but it also had one other consequence. There had been a decades-long civil war in the province of Aceh on the island of Sumatra. Now, throughout that time, Fairtrade had worked with coffee farmers on the island, but had not been able to access them for producer support. And so as soon as the tsunami happened, there was an armistice, there was peace in Aceh, and it was my job to go and see what those farmers needed. And you'd think, right, oh my God, poor farmers, war. The first thing I noticed going into Takengon in the mountains of Aceh was just how lush and beautiful the forest was. Stunning, right? There was a carpet of trees. The second was these fierce farmers who'd raised their families, who had sung their Gayo songs because they were the Gayo people. They had grown their coffee and traded it in very difficult circumstances of civil war, but they had also fought the war like guerrilla warriors. And look at all the fierceness of them, and they'd still persisted and they were still resilient. And what I did is I hired a local expert to just go and do training for them and what their rights were, what the fair trade standards were, how to operate their businesses more efficiently. And 2 years later, when I went back, 100 of these producer representatives, all the different fair trade cooperatives came together and they formed a coalition that made them stronger within the fair trade movement. And they were expert negotiators with their buyers. So they didn't need any of us anymore. And so you think about the adversity that these people went through for decades, right? The fierceness in them. And if they can live through that adversity and they can come and rise into their power, so can everybody else. A decade later in 2015, I went to a different part of Sumatra. And there I saw a very different picture. I was working at Mondelez at the time. I was in charge of palm oil sustainable sourcing. And as we were flying into the city of Pekanbaru, I saw a sight that I will never forget until the day I die, because the forest was burning. You could see plumes of smoke from the ground up into the airplane. And I wasn't the only one watching, right? My colleagues from Mondelez, my colleagues from other companies, colleagues from NGOs, the government were all watching. And it was horrifying because it was the worst deforestation that had occurred in decades. And fortunately, the deforestation hasn't been as bad since. That put us all into a new level, a new gear of action, right? All of us got together and played different roles, complementary roles in getting the entire supply chain of palm oil monitored on satellites, had same rules for expectations for all the companies that were producing palm oil, and work with multiple stakeholders, the government, NGOs, companies, on how we were going to solve the problem. And by 2021, the NGOs had confirmed that deforestation in palm oil had halved. And that taught me that when we come together as human beings and we truly feel something is close to our heart and very important, we can shift systems very fast and we can make things better systemically. So those are the two key lessons. There's many more, but those are very big contrasts and similarities.
Sure. Thank you so much for sharing this with us. That's actually really, really inspiring. So, For over 20 years, you have worked at senior levels at Fairtrade International, Mondelez International, Nike, and other organizations, building and executing business-integrated people and planet strategies, and catalyzing system-changing industry innovation to accelerate the race to save the planet. So it looks like you were interested and involved in being a force for good in the world very early in your career. Would you say you were a pioneer? Because not everybody has started so long ago. And have you had any resistance, perhaps, when working on integrating people and planet strategies within these organizations, or was it welcome and was it a strategy that was already integrated? I was wondering about that.
So, about the pioneer, I have a couple of friends who called me pioneer. I think there are many pioneers in many areas. What I love to do is two things: work in white or gray space, and also figure out doggedly what that systemic edge is, who's in the system, and how we can work together to shift the system. So this is what I really like to do. And I've been fortunate enough to find the places where I can make an impact that way, and then see where others can continue the journey. In terms of resistance, companies are very large entities, right? And they're full of people, they're not inert places. And so, of course, there's resistance for a couple of reasons. There's some people who just don't understand, don't see it. The language around environment and human rights is very complex. It's not as clear as the quarterly deliverables. And then there's also sometimes a generational shift, right? But what's important is to not try to move everybody, but to find your champions and collaborators. That's so critical, because your collaborators are the ones that will help you figure out how to integrate all of these aspects within the business. I can tell you none of what I've moved would have moved if it hadn't been for people figuring out how they put this into their marketing strategies, into their brand plans, into their sourcing strategies, into how they actually move the business. And the champions, who are the leaders who really believe, who look at their children and say, I'm going to be courageous, I'm going to be forward-looking, and I'm going to do this because I know this is important. And to find those champions and collaborators is in and of itself an art, but you must do it. And that was my secret to getting things done. And it's not a secret. I want everybody to know it. Find your champions and collaborators.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good one. So perhaps to expand a little bit on this, and also to share my own experience, because in the past, I worked for a well-known company, and I have been faced with a lot of resistance and barriers from really top C-suite level chairman of the company when wanting to integrate sustainability strategies and a sustainability program within the company. So you are known to have a talent for awakening people and planet impetus in C-suite business leaders. Would you have any other tips or words of advice to help people do that within their own company, perhaps, when they are faced with that type of resistance?
I think I have two answers. One is, my most powerful mechanism has been to take senior leaders to farms, plantations, and origins. Whether it was at Fairtrade, whether it was Mondelez, Nike wasn't possible because it was during the pandemic. But truly, when you take a business president or a procurement leader to see the ground and they witness for themselves, they become your biggest champions. It's transformative, right? And they will then help you figure out how to influence. The other answer is, I've had a bit of a funny trajectory, right? Because if your parents are business people, you grow up with the C-suite in your house and you're used to talking to them a very different way. And my parents raised a very precocious child. So I didn't know any different besides to speak with C-suites the way I did. And then again, in the first decade at Fairtrade, especially when I started, Fairtrade was so small that we all went to board meetings. We all had lunch with the CEO every day. And so it was just normal to play at that level. What I had to learn was how to do this in a company that is worth billions of dollars, where there's thousands of people vying for the CEO's attention, how do you do it in a mindful way? And how do you learn to do it? And that's where it's really about making sure that you focus on three things. One is learn through your manager, through your leaders, how you can influence at steadily higher levels. Secondly, you never influence alone, right? So you make sure you align everybody else on the mission and what you want to ask and what you want to influence. And you make sure that you take your village with you inside the company. And third is, and this is what I see a lot, especially in the sustainability profession, a lot of people coming up new, having gone through some really talented education, some really excellent training, but that will not help you, right? That will not be enough to help you. You need to understand the business of the business, how the business operates, what the business does, how the business communicates formally and informally, and how the business communicates at increasingly higher levels so that you can learn to translate what you need and what you need the business to do in the language and in the cycle of the business. And again, this was a huge learning, and there was a little bit of 2 steps forward, 1 step back for me, but it was really critical in my ability to learn how to influence at higher levels.
Yeah, I would love to see you in action, I must say. Thank you for these pieces of advice. That's really great. So you are known for your visionary out-of-the-box thinking, finding sparks of ideas from the world's leading experts and innovators. Can you tell us about that aspect of your personality? And have you always had that talent? Or is it something that you have strengthened over time like a muscle? That's actually really interesting to hear about you being at home and talking to your parents who were, the leaders.
Yeah, I think they always spoke with me as if I was an adult, right? And so we'd be in situations where we'd be with other adults and I would participate in the conversations, and it would be very disorienting for the other adults because their children didn't do that. But for me, I think it's a little bit of both, right? So if you have to figure out how to integrate yourself into 3 different high schools, you just do. You figure out who the kids are, how things work, right? If you have to go and work in the slums of India once, and then the slums of Nairobi next, and then if you have to go into the mountains of Aceh once, and then you have to go into the boardroom in Portland once, you have to figure out how to adapt. I think the key thing that's helped me is I don't see your education. I don't see whether you're wealthy or poor. I just know that everybody has something to offer and everybody has something to teach. And I love to learn, right? Some of the innovators I found were a couple of guys from a university who had a tool that they were trying to implement inside one area. And I was, seeing the potential of this tool becoming a universal tool, right? And I would have never thought to do this tool. It was a big radar satellite monitoring tool from these guys at Intelligence. And I didn't care that they were young. I didn't care that they were from a university and they were very small. I just saw the potential. When I saw a group of NGOs in Ethiopia coming together and working together, I just thought, wow, what a beautiful way to build a coalition. I think the key is you build your muscle by seeing that spark in everybody, and you don't worry about where they're from, and what degree they have, or how much wealth they've amassed.
Yeah, I love that. Seeing the potential in everybody, and yeah, I love that. I feel very close to you in spirit, I have to say. So I love to talk about the power of collaborations, and you are very good at harnessing the convening power of an industry, which is crucial when we want to create radical systemic change in the light of global challenges. So how important would you say coming together, collaborating with others in your industry is? And can you give us a real life concrete example based on your experience that would illustrate this and really bring it to life? We were talking about storytelling and people's stories in the beginning.
Yeah, I think I'm going to share a quote that I learned in Palestine when I was there in spring 2023, because it was so beautiful, right? There was a pastor's wife, she's American, And we were wondering what she's doing in Palestine as we knew that the situation was getting tense. And she said to us, there's a saying in Palestine, no one gets saved alone. Remember that. And why I want everybody watching this podcast, listening to this podcast to know that is because we are in a moment right now where I see, especially inside companies, impact leaders, sustainability leaders, bogged down in complexity, increasing potential resistance, a lot of reporting frameworks, and then cutting budgets that are cut so that they can't go travel, they can't go to conferences, right? And so I still want to remind people we are not going to get saved alone. We need to shift systems. And so whenever you can, however you can, take a moment and pick up that email or reach out to a peer and have that conversation, even if it's remote, because it's really important that we come together alone. The system that I'm going to speak about shifting is within the satellite monitoring and palm oil and how we achieve that within 2 to 3 years. Okay. And first of all, you don't shift those systems overnight. You have to learn, right? That's what's really important. I spoke to a class at Parsons last year, and they said, well, here's our lovely textbook. And I said, well, thank you very much. I've never taken a class on systems design, but what I know is you need to find your allies. You need to find the other people who are looking to nudge the system, and you need to figure out how to hold each other's hands and nudge the system together. So this was really around being able to go to all the conferences on Global Forest Watch, which is owned by World Resources International, to go to all the roundtables on sustainable palm oil, to go to Innovation Forum, to talk to people and to know what was going on, realizing that we had a problem where we weren't able to solve deforestation in palm oil, realizing that companies were starting to map their palm oil mills on Global Forest Watch. And they were starting to do that 2 or 3, 10 mills at a time because it was very expensive. And I was wondering, well, how many mills are there? And if we map all the mills and if we monitor them, will that help us go faster? And the answer was there's a manageable number of mills. There was a few thousand. 80% are in Indonesia and Malaysia. And yes, if we monitor them all, it's likely that we can monitor most of the risk around deforestation. And I thought, well, let's do it. Why are we doing this as single companies? And as one new entrant, right? I'd only been in the palm oil sector for a couple of years, and people didn't listen. So I found one of my customers, a really large retailer, and the sustainability director in that retailer asked me what was going on. And I said, I want to call a meeting with all the companies. And I want all the companies to come together, and I want us to agree on a common monitoring system, but no one's listening to me. And she said, I'm a really large retailer, possibly the largest in the world. I'll call the meeting. I don't have to be the champion. I had to find that ally who was going to pull that systemic lever with me. So we called a meeting, and within 2 days, we decided that we were going to do this as an industry, and 68 multi-stakeholder initiatives, companies, experts, NGOs came together and said, we're going to do this. And within 2 to 3 years, we'd had the supply chain for palm oil mapped, right? Other examples exist around modern slavery and livelihoods, but this was one that's very real, very recent, and very pertinent to people. So ultimately, we need this to happen over and over again. I think we can do it. Just need to make sure we rise and do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that example with us. So your motto is believe it to see it. So can you explain what does it mean to you?
I think it means that I want all of us to dream big. I want us to dream big, so big that it scares us. I'm going to repeat that. I want us to dream so big that it scares us. And then I want all of us to rise, find each other, and to make those dreams come true.
Yeah, so like big vision, projection.
We need big visions. We need big visions right now, Ingrid. We're done with incrementalism. I think it's bogging us down. I think it's creating a lot of burnout. It's making people drop out of the profession, right? We've got impact leaders burning out at 50%, a rate of 50%. We cannot have this. And these are incredibly intelligent, incredibly emotionally competent, incredibly collaborative people who are absolutely willing and able to rise to the occasion.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually think this motto summarizes you really well, because you almost make people believe in themselves and in their vision, and you bring them perhaps to a place they didn't imagine at first, but you show them the possibilities and you bring them there, which is really beautiful. So you mentioned this for what you shared with us, but you believe in the unique gifts of individuals, and you like spotting promising emerging solutionaries, building brain trust for game-changing positive impact on people and planet. So harnessing your own individual power and potential is certainly one of the most beautiful and important things you can do for yourself. It's like the quest of a lifetime for all of us. How do you do that for others? So obviously we started to talk about it through your motto, but if you give us a bigger picture.
I think by simplifying, clarifying, really. I think we are in a world that constantly, from the time we are born, tries to shape us in its own mold, right? We are shaped in a certain way in school. We are told whether we are smart or not, whatever that means. We are then evaluated through our work lives, and again, we're shaped. And in that process, on top of everything, with the recent pandemic, we're burnt out. With so many work pressures, so many environmental pressures, so much going on in the world, so much information being thrown at us than ever before, life has become really complicated.
Yeah.
So and again, nobody's perfect, right? I work on myself. I have help to work on myself. And the work that I do with the people that I work with is really about simplifying and clarifying, right? That's simplifying and clarifying about who am I really and why am I here? What's my connection to humanity and what's my connection to nature, and how I use that as my compass to navigate the world instead of letting the world tell me who I am and who I'm not, or letting the world set my priorities. And truly that power of who you are intergenerationally and why you're here and how you're connected to the bigger world is the biggest power and the biggest light. And that's really when you go back to that, when I go back to my own core inner compass of resonance, as I call it, that's what creates that power and grows that power. And then the second part of it is then find community with others who are on the same journey, which is also what I do.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think that's such a powerful message about simplifying, because it is true. Well, I do find that us human beings, we are quite complex already. And then we live in a world that seems increasingly complex, and almost taking that journey to simplify, understand what your core is, what drives you, what you want to do, etc. That's just so key, to cut the noise and, as you say, find your path, and as simple as possible. And when you are able to do that, that's really powerful. So let me check where we are. So I know you have catalyzed impact on speed and scale in environment, human rights, and livelihoods. You've aimed to create radical systemic change in global challenges like deforestation, you talked about it, or modern slavery, for example. I wanted to ask you, are there areas, topics that you have more at heart, where you would like to have more of an impact, and why?
I would like us to come together, honestly. I've been fortunate enough to work across the span of environment and human rights, right? People, planet, and then also governance, right? Working with the companies and their C-suites and boards. And I often hear, human rights people saying, well, we don't really understand about environment. We kind of touch environmental justice, but not really environment, or environmentalists say, well, do I have to look at human rights? And ultimately, I want us to really think through a very simple human equation, right? The fact that we still have poverty, inequality, human rights issues, the fact that we are using up the world's resources far too quickly for the world to be able to replenish them, tells me that we are stuck in this mindset of some of us thinking we need and deserve more than other people, and consciously or unconsciously that we deserve more than our children and grandchildren. This is, for me, the highest irony, right? Everybody I know is in love with their children and grandchildren. But how we are operating the world today, we are taking from them more resources, right? And so I would like us to pivot to really thinking about people and planet in one breath. It's truly about having enough for everyone in this generation and in all future generations. And that's why I'm really, really passionate about pivoting the center of our leadership from an external axis and external validation to going back to me, us, and nature in this generation and in all generations to come. That's what I'm incredibly passionate about.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you are approaching both, because I'm typically someone who was more into the environment and nature in the past. And the more it goes, the more I'm integrating social change as well. Yeah. And also what I'm trying to do, through this podcast, through the magazine, through the guests I invite, I'm really trying to build this bigger picture that everything is also connected. When you are talking of human rights, of poverty, etc., it also has an impact on the environment, or the environment can have an impact on people as well, and on these problems. And at the end of the day, is as per your mission, you want to lift everybody. You've got to look at the complete picture. You can't leave some people behind and only look at, a certain part of the population or a certain issue. That's not how things work. And I kind of make it my mission to create that kind of connection between everything.
Thank you.
So, you have created an organization called, tell me if I pronounce it right, Illumine.Earth.
Beautiful, Illumine.Earth. Yeah, perfect.
Illumine.Earth. So it focuses on regenerative leadership. So first question, how would you define regenerative leadership? What's your own definition?
I think it's three things. One is being, really that being somebody who is centered on your me, us, and nature. It's about knowing that planetary well-being and people well-being, human well-being are indelibly interconnected. And three is about keeping intergenerational interests at the same level of priority as short-term interests. I think currently short-term interests are being met at the cost of the interests of future generations, and we need to switch that. So these three things: being, knowing, and doing, holistically for me, us, and nature for generations.
Perfect. Thank you for that. So how old is Illumine.Earth?
I launched it in January last year, 2023.
Okay, so quite recent.
Very recent.
I wanted to ask you, how did you decide to create your own business? What is the story behind it?
The story behind it is really sitting at COP15, the Climate Biodiversity Convention in Montreal, and realizing that we needed to go faster. First, it was a hope, because that was the convention where the world agreed finally that we should save 30% of nature by 2030 and 50% by 2050, and we had to get there. And I realized that we didn't need just a few people I knew to step up, that we needed all of us to step up and rise to the opportunity to save the planet, to make it more equal, to solve for some of our biggest existential challenges together. And I knew that sitting inside a company or an industry would help me do that to a certain extent. But creating a platform for all and every leader and every solutions provider to be able to unlock themselves would be much more powerful. And that was the impetus behind Illumine.Earth.
Okay, yeah, fantastic. So what would you say is your overarching mission, and why do you believe it is important in the world?
It has a vision. Illumine.Earth has a vision and a mission. And the vision is to, within our generation, see a world where all nature and people thrive, right? And that's not just my company's mission, that's my personal mission. And I've got a line in the sand around 2050. Highly ambitious. It's my big, scary dream. And the mission is to figure out how to illuminate and accelerate their journey. Illuminate because I believe that we all have it in us. And accelerate is to figure out how to light that spark within so that we accelerate.
Yeah, beautiful. So about scaling and accelerating, I know you have 2050 as your North Star. As world leaders have agreed that by 2050, we need to restore 50% of nature. And well before that, to curb climate change to 1.5 degrees. Do you think it is possible to accelerate change and scale regenerative ways of living, leading, doing business to bring us where we want to be by 2050?
I think yes, and it's a matter of finding those leaders who want to be ready who are ready, so that there's enough of us who nudge at the edges of the system until it turns over, and do that over and over again. There are three kinds of people that I come across. People who are in denial about climate change or their connection to it, can't do anything with them. And there are two other types of people who are ready but have never had the connection, the ability to do something about it, or people who have been playing very small, and if they just had their spark lit within, that they could actually step up and rise to a bigger level. And those are the two leaders that I want to work with, whether you're a business leader, whether you're a solutions provider, whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you are a social impact leader, whether you're an NGO leader, whether you're an impact leader inside of a company, a sustainability, environment, human rights leader. If you're one of those two people, you're either ready to step into an impact role, even if it doesn't have an impact title, or to integrate impact into your business, or you're ready to grow your business or to grow your leadership. Let's work together, because I know that when you are fully unlocked and activated, we will make that 2050 goal happen.
Yeah. I love the messages. I'm actually going to have someone I see as an important world leader on the podcast soon. She got a message from him last night. I was like, yes. And yes, just something I wanted to say is that you obviously have these powerful people who are already convinced of, creating change in the world, have already built networks, have influence. And I think you mentioned that through various stories earlier, that's just so important. And something I would like perhaps people who are interested in doing something, even if you are at a very basic level, or you have never done much in this area before, I really think that in that space of people who want to create change, it is quite easy to actually get in touch with these people. Just take the first step, just get in touch. People will be surprised how available people can make themselves when they meet people who are truly willing to create change. So I think that should never stop you to be at a basic level or just being a starter.
Absolutely.
So I'd like to cover the 3 pillars of what you do so that people who are interested in integrating regenerative leadership and solutions in what they do can understand your roadmap. So if we start with the first pillar, regenerative leadership, you say that you ignite leaders' journey to regenerative resonance. What does it mean, and what are the benefits for business leaders?
So regenerative resonance truly is about what I've been speaking about, which is igniting and helping you remember mainly who you are intergenerationally, what is your identity, what are your powers, your personal power that comes from that identity, remembering your purpose, because once you remember your identity, you remember your purpose, because I believe we're all born to purpose. And then remembering your absolutely unique and indelible connection to our shared humanity and to nature. And remembering that we're also part of nature and it nurtures us. That is resonance, right? So the more you remember who you are, how you're connected to all of us, and how you're connected to nature, the more you come into resonance with your own light, the more you grow your own light. And then what you do is then you make your shifts, your next steps, whether it's in your life, your leadership, or your livelihood, based on that. So I work one-on-one with leaders. I work with teams to help them do that. And when they do that, incredibly powerful. I get blown away when I see some of the shifts.
That's such a beautiful job you do. You
I
create.
love my job.
So for each one of these pillars, I would love it if you could tell us an actual example. So for regenerative leadership, could you tell us the story of a leader you have helped in this area to really bring it to life?
So number one, I can tell you the story, but I can't name names.
Yeah. And keep anything that needs to be kept confidential always.
So one example I have is of a leader who was a commercial leader, a mid-level director who was incredibly successful, but was missing something. And when we took them through the regenerative resonance process, the outcome was they realized how big they wanted to play and that their life really needed to be about impact. And now they are spearheading the transformation of one of the largest impact banks in the world that's also somehow connected to where they're originally from, which is in a country that's in a very difficult state right now. And so they're actually able to help their country that they're from and also be a big transformation leader to completely ratchet up the impact of this impact-led bank as the commercial leader.
How amazing is that? Incredible. So your second pillar is about regenerative business. So you say it is about inspiring transformation to regenerative business. So can you tell us what it would involve for a business?
What it would involve for a business is exactly what it would involve for a regenerative leader, right? So being centered on why you're existing, what your connection and your benefit is to humanity and nature, and what is your interconnectedness and the dependency on humanity and nature. Knowing that your business will thrive when you interconnect human and planetary business, and know that you prioritize intergenerational thinking and planning at the same level as short-term planning. And I'm going to be very honest, I haven't gotten there yet to find a business that's willing to transform to that level, because most businesses I work with need to start at an earlier part of their journey. They need to start with the fundamentals of even getting on their sustainability journey and on their impact journey. And for those businesses, I work with a solutions partner to get them the fundamentals done, right? To put in their environmental and social strategy in place. And what I focus on is working with the leaders so that over time we can move. I found that the most important part, whether or not is focusing on the leader, but I think we have a ways to go before we can start to turn businesses truly to regenerative, especially the very large ones. And I want to be very transparent about that.
Yeah. Okay. So can you tell us a story of transformation of a business you have supported?
The transformation of the business is really not there yet, right? I think businesses need fundamentals first. There are very leading companies that have amazing sustainability teams that are really doing good. The companies that I've worked with need to start earlier with a fundamental foundational layer of environmental and social strategy. And so that's where we're at. We're transforming them in the first step, just to put in the strategy.
Okay. So the third and last pillar for you is about catalyzing exponential impacts of what you call solutionists. I find that one so important and so interesting. So can you tell us how you make this happen?
So I fundamentally believe that we have most of the solutions we need right now for the planet, and that we have enough ingenuity in humankind to be able to invent as many new solutions as we need. The problem that I've often seen, and the areas that I've worked at within my career, is linking a solution to the system, right? To the system that can take it so that the system can operate for the solution and transform. And so I often see that solutions providers have gaps in being able to speak to the off-takers, being visible, and being able to have a growth mindset. So this is what I do. I work with solutions providers on telling their story more powerfully, appearing in forums where they can tell that story, whether it's in a conference or in an industry association, and then linking them to companies and industries that need the solution so that they can all come together and implement the solution. And that's exactly what I've done with every solutions provider that I've worked with, is on these three things: the story, the forum for the story, and then the connection to the company or the industry that can take that story and that solution.
So do you want to give us another kind of real life concrete example about that?
Yeah, so there is a regenerative and traceable commodities supplier or solutionist who has been incredibly impactful for a decade, and they are really critical for an industry. They've been operational in Asia, Africa, and Europe for this last decade. They're really necessary in the US industry that is relevant to where they operate. And that's exactly what we've done. We've completely streamlined and sharpened their storyline. We've made it very compelling. It was already a compelling story, it just wasn't said in a very compelling way. We've made sure that they've shown up at multiple conferences this year. We've made sure that they've joined the industry association that was really important for them. And we've facilitated connections to companies. And that's actually creating a lot of demand for their solution. We're starting to do that more and more with nature-based solutions as well, because again, those are plentiful, but there's just not enough of a connect back to how do you speak with an industry and a company, and how do you tell your story, not from a technical perspective, but from a human and a business perspective. I'm really excited about the solutions part too, because the leaders plus the solutions is truly, I feel, what's going to nudge the systems for business, because businesses need solutions. They need something that they can use to transform to regenerative business.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're very right. It's about creating exposure, creating awareness, harnessing their story, making it more impactful. And all of these businesses who have grown or are being created, they need to become the future of tomorrow, of today and tomorrow, obviously. So we've been talking a lot about how you help other leaders. I wanted to ask you about your own leadership style. how would you say it is to work or collaborate with you? So what is your own leadership style?
Very much in line with how I see the world, right? If I see potential in everybody, I tend to see potential in everybody I work with. Sometimes I see potential where you don't see your potential, but that's the exciting part to help you unlock that. And I love to empower people. I love to work with people who do things that I don't know how to do. And so it's truly very much in line with who I am. It's empowering, it's collaborative, and it's figuring out how to unlock the potential of humans and teams.
Such a beautiful mission. Would you say you are a bit of a chameleon, that you adapt to whoever people are, whatever situation you're into?
If I am, I don't even know I'm doing it. I think my accent changes when I'm in India, or even in Canada, I'm told I'm a little bit more Canadian. And so I think that way, but what I try to do is to find the commonality in all of us, right? When we spoke earlier in this segment, I told you about how I love coming to Paris with my French sisters. They're not my sisters, they're my former colleagues, but we found a mission that we loved in common and we worked on it together, and we found family in each other, and we connect on when somebody's had a child, or when somebody's had a change in career, or we call each other and support each other. That's all life is about, is finding that shared humanity in all of us.
Yeah, I mean, you're someone so well traveled, and also you've seen all extremes. From what I gather from you, you must be someone very flexible. I have a sense that you also manage to still be very personable with people. You really see the human in every human, right?
Yeah, I do.
So, if there was one thing you would like people to remember and take away from this podcast about regenerative resonance, what would it be?
I want you to remember, right? We're in a very pivotal moment in history. Just 1 week ago, on the 22nd of July, the hottest temperature ever recorded was measured. We have a very short window to act. At the end of your life, if you want to be that person who wants to tell your children and your grandchildren that when we found out that we had a very short window to act so that we could create a world in which you thrive, instead of doing what we could, we rose and did what we had to. If you're that person who wants to do that, but you don't know how because life is too complicated and you're too bogged down, find your internal regenerative resonance. Recenter yourself on who you really are, why you're here, and what your connection is to humanity and nature, and find your way forward. And find all of us, right? Find Ingrid, find me, so that we can work with you on that, because we would love to do that.
Mm. I had full body chills as you were saying this, which never happened before. I think that's such a fantastic message. I also want to say, not everybody has to be an eco-warrior. So sometimes when I am in the climate circles, that's something that is brought up, that people describe themselves like this. But you don't have to be an eco-warrior. The picture can be so different for so many people, and it's more about, how can you contribute with your personality, with your talent, with your gifts. It's different for every one of us. The picture for me is not going to be the same as for you, and yet we are aligned in the direction where we are going. Believe it to see it. Dream.
I want to add to that, right? And you don't have to do big world shifting things either, right? You can do very small things with your children, in your community, locally. There's a lot you can do, but do it from that inner compass, because that will be what drives you and connects you back to your light, and it will nourish your life.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Karimah, I'm afraid we are coming to the end of this podcast, and I always end with the same question because this podcast is called Shades of Life for a reason, as every guest brings their own color, vision, and mission to it. So, if you were a color, what would it be and why?
If I were a color, I would be hot pink because I've decided that that's the color of dreams that are so big that they scare you. And I will keep hot pink as a color to remind me of making those dreams come true.
Amazing. I love it. Hot pink. I never had this before. I think that's what you're wearing today. No, it looks like it.
Close. But you see it on my logo, right? You see hot pink on my logo.
Okay, I'll check your logo when I use it color. So thank you so much for joining me, Karimah, today and sharing about your trajectory, your experience, and what you aim to do with regenerative leadership. Can you tell us where can people find you if they want to be in touch?
So you can go to my website, Illumine.Earth. You can find me on LinkedIn, and I'm also always happy to get a call booked in on Calendly, and I'm sure Ingrid will put all of that into the podcast notes.
Yeah, I will add all the links to the show notes, as we said. So thank you again for joining me, Karimah. It was a pleasure to have you today. And thank you to everyone for watching and listening.
Thank you. Have a beautiful day.
Thank you.
So fürchterlich romantisch.